Hey guys, today I want to give you a few quick and easy design tips for your next web design. These can become quite handy, especially if you're not a web designer. The first and really an important aspect is you should always know your client, because it really depends whether you're designing a website for a finance company or for an insurance company, or if it's an e-commerce store for toys for kids, for example. Your font choice, your colors, everything will kind of depend on it. So you should always consider that. Let's have a look at an example for that. So yeah, let's compare this consulting website with another e-commerce website that I've looked up. Maybe some of you know Toys R Us, but if we take a look at the choice of colors here that I used for this landing page, it's a pretty standard blue, which kind of emphasizes the way that this consulting firm is kind of trustworthy. It's strong, it's kind of calm. And those colors actually help providing that kind of vibe. The choice of font is a sans serif font. We don't need anything playful or just the headlines have to be clear, and we want clear headlines, clear text without any playfulness. If we are designing for a bank or a consulting firm, for example, if we would compare the consulting firm to the Toys R Us e-commerce store, we already see a really big difference regarding the color choice and the font choice as well. Because if we take a look, we do have all sorts of pink, and compared with blue, the font is a little more playful compared to the sans serif font. And it just makes a big difference, because if we would just have like a typical banking look for a toy store, people would be it would be weird, you know? Another really quick and easy tip you should always consider is don't use simple grays. Why? Because they are kind of boring. I mean, I've heard that a lot of companies actually use grays on purpose because they make their product stand out when you're in a supermarket, for example. But most of the time on a website, don't just use simple grays. I'm going to show you a little trick that will immediately help out with grays. Alright, so we're just going to create a little rectangle with a gray. We have C4, C4, C4 is kind of good, or you just go with EEE, which is another gray. I mean, it's a gray, you know, it's simple, it works. It's kind of boring, it's kind of calm, whatever. But if we now take a look and choose a little slight tint of blue instead of a boring gray, this already looks really different. It kind of gives a more chilled vibe. It doesn't look too boring, and it's a really simple and effective trick to enhance your fill colors. Let's talk about text, because text is quite important and a lot of websites have text on. I mean, there are other aspects that kind of can transport information like audio, video, or any other type of media format, but most of the time you will transport your information via text. So I'm going to show you a few quick and easy tips to improve readability and the way you transport information via text. So letter spacing and casing is really important as well. If we take a look at this little headline here and we duplicate it, move it a little bit to the right. You know, this it's okay, yeah, it's a headline, it kind of states something, but we can improve this by doing a few things. First of all, we could just do an uppercase. We could say it's a big statement. It already has a lot more weight to it. So that's one way. We could also increase the font weight to a thicker font and go and increase the letter spacing a little bit, like 8% looks good to me. If we compare those two against each other, we already see what a difference some casing and letter spacing actually provides. Alright, so line height. Line height is an important aspect when it comes to large chunks of text. If you have a lot of text on your website, for example on a blog page or something like that, it's pretty helpful to work with line height in order to increase the readability. I'm going to show you an example on medium.com as well, but now we're going to take a look at this example first. I've prepared 2 blocks of text. We're going to modify the right side. We have set the line height to auto, which for a 12 pixel text will be around 12 pixel as well. If we increase, or 14 pixel as actually it says, if we increase the line height to 150%, for example, you already see a really big difference. Considering that we would have a lot more text, not just this little piece of text, it would greatly increase the flow, the way we read this text. Something that would be a little more feasible is if we take a look at the Medium page. I just looked up a random blog post on Medium, and we can decrease the line height to the base font size, which is 21 pixels. If we set the line height to 21 pixels as well, we already see that the text now is a lot harder to read, since the spacing between each line is a lot less. So yeah, a recommendation would be to set the line height to 1/5 of the font size, which is normally the way to go if you would use Bootstrap, for example. It usually applies that kind of line height by default. So we talked about readability in the previous tip. Paragraph width is something that is also pretty easy to apply and can also help a lot with the readability of your text. Take this for example. We do have a long paragraph that actually stretches to the whole width of our example frame here. If we reduce the width of this paragraph to, for example, the width of our image, and we just fix some, so we just applied proper breaks for our sentences, and if we now also increase the line height to around 150%, okay, this kind of breaks the frame a little. We got some space to the top. If we move it up a little bit, we already see, compared to the previous example, that this is a lot nicer to read. It's more concise. Your eyes don't have to travel too much line by line. For example, if you read a book and if you've practiced speed reading, for example, you would usually just read the main parts in the middle and keep out the left and the right, which is usually helpful if you want to process lines faster. We can say that the amount of characters should be around 80 characters per line. You don't have to be too strict about it, but that's some measurement you can apply. Alright, now we're going to talk about forms, because forms are used on a lot of websites as well, and there are a few quick and easy things you could do to improve the accessibility, the readability, and the way user interacts with your forms. Alright, so I've provided you guys an example of a pretty bad form for any kind of registration. We do have a username field, first name field, last name field, and some other address related stuff. There are a lot of things we can improve here. I'm going to talk about the points, do a little fast forward while I'm doing it, and then we're going to take a look at what has actually changed. So the first thing you should always consider is grouping form fields that belong together separately in their corresponding form groups. For example, if we do have this address part, we could just gather it below a headline saying address data, We do have the name stuff and just call it name, for example. That would be one really basic thing you should always do. Another thing would be to think about how the user actually taps through the form, because sometimes the order in which your form fields are put together do matter. For example, a user that would usually just use his keyboard to access form fields would consider that when he's putting in his first name, usually the second field would be his last name. But if you have the country, for example, after his first name, that would be kind of weird when you're tabbing through the form fields. Another thing you should always consider is adding labels, because don't just use placeholders alone. Placeholders alone aren't a good practice, because, for example, if a user enters his username into this field and there wouldn't be a username, then he wouldn't know what this field was actually about, except for he would keep it in his mind. It would be pretty simple to add a label, and usually it's also best practice because there are, when it comes to area accessibility, it's kind of important to always add a label for an input. You can set the label to a display none so that the username isn't readable to the normal user but accessible to screen readers. Or you could just use area labels, but usually you would assign a label for a form field. Another simple trick is varying the input width depending on what type of data is actually entered into the field. For example, if we take a look at a street address, it's usually a little bit longer compared to a zip code, which is in Germany around 5 characters or 5 numbers. So yeah, keep that in mind and vary the width of the input depending on the data that will be possibly entered into that field. So now we take a look at how this will look in the end after I'm finished. Alright, so this would be my finished registration form. So we just did what I said. We added a few little placeholders where they would be useful. We could also add a little zip code placeholder here to kind of give a pattern how a zip code would usually look like. These are examples for the right use of placeholders actually, because a lot of times people put like please enter your name here or something like that, but a placeholder by its kind of definition is an example or a pattern that would be entered into this type of field, but that's just my 5 cents here. Yeah, so this would be the registration form. If we compare that to our previous form, it's a lot easier to see what kind of fields belong together. It just looks a little nicer. It's pretty easy to do, so you should always consider doing it this way. Whenever you are using radio buttons or checkboxes, you might consider doing the following. If we have a look at this example, I've got 3 choices to choose from, depending on what kind of subscription model I want. This looks fine. This is, even if you want to spare some space and it just has to be kind of simple, this is totally fine, and depending on the use case, you can keep it like that. But something really simple that makes the whole form look a little more interesting is to use cards instead of plain radio buttons. The user then can select one of those cards, and we could also add a little stroke to kind of show the user what he actually selected. For example, we add a little blue here, kind of turn the opacity a little bit down to 70% or something. And we can easily turn this into this just by using some some cards. Instead of radio buttons, we could also provide a little description about whatever this item is about, and it looks just a little nicer. Just something simple you can do. And the last thing to wrap this video up is I want to talk about animations. Animations are really important, but don't overuse them. I've seen so many websites that overuse animations. Every element is flashing in, sliding in, fading in, this and that, you know? It's too much. Use them, but use them in subtle ways, and only use them if they are appropriate. There are a few good websites like Apple, for example, that really put good use for animations. Yeah, but don't overuse them. If you would like to see something about animations, let me know in the comments down below, because I've recently discovered a few nice and easy ways to create animations for the web. And yeah, I'm referring here to Lottie and a few apps that can actually generate easy Lottie animations. Yeah, let me down below. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and see you in the next video. Bye!